Many countries tend to become more progressive as years progress. There are exceptions, most notably the Islamic Revolution in Iran, 1978-79, and then there is Afghanistan. And recent news was pretty striking. In January 2026, the Taliban quietly signed a sweeping new criminal court regulation into law. The document spans 119 articles and fundamentally reshapes how justice is carried out under Taliban rule. What's inside has alarmed rights groups. Provisions that further restrict women, normalize violence, formally divide society into social classes, and even recognize categories of free and enslaved people under the law. Let's break it down. When discussing the origins of the Taliban, we need to talk about Russia and Great Britain. Both powers mingled into Afghan affairs. During the 19th century Great Game, there was a geopolitical rivalry between the British Empire and the Russian Empire over control and influence in Central Asia. Afghanistan was seen as a buffer state. Russian influence in the region led to direct British intervention. In the First Anglo-Afghan War, 1839-1842, Britain invaded Afghanistan to replace the ruler Dost Muhammad Khan with a more pro-British leader. The occupation triggered widespread resistance and ended in disaster when a retreating British force was almost entirely destroyed. The failure showed how difficult Afghanistan was to control, hence the country is sometimes nicknamed the graveyard of empires. The Second Anglo-Afghan War, 1878-1880, broke out after a Russian diplomatic mission was accepted in Kabul, while a British one was rejected. Britain invaded again and won military victories, but chose not to annex the country. Instead, Afghanistan remained internally independent while Britain took control of its foreign policy, effectively making it a buffer state aligned with British interests. In 1929 and in 1930, the Soviet army made incursions into the country. This was not the last time Red Army troops advanced into Afghanistan. In the late 1970s, Moscow turned its attention to Afghanistan as the country's communist government began to collapse. The Soviet Union decided to intervene to keep its allies in power. In December 1979, the Soviet war machine rolled across the border through the southern Central Asian republics. Within weeks, 85,000 Soviet troops were deployed on Afghan soil. The Kremlin feared that if the communist regime fell, an Islamic takeover would follow, just as it had earlier that year in neighboring Iran after the Ayatollah came to power. Pakistan was also moving in a more hardline Islamic direction. Soviet leaders worried that this wave could spread into their own Muslim-majority republics in Central Asia. Resistance formed quickly. Various Islamist groups, united under the name Mujahideen, launched a fierce guerrilla war. Backed by American money and weapons, they ground the Soviet army down for 10 years of brutal fighting. In 1989, Mikhail Gorbachev withdrew Soviet forces. Afghanistan was left shattered and unstable. The Mujahideen alliance soon fractured and civil war erupted between rival warlords. Out of that chaos, a new fundamentalist movement rose. Around 1994, in Kandahar, the Taliban emerged, made up largely of students from religious schools along the Afghan-Pakistani border. At first, they were small and poorly equipped, but under the leadership of Mullah Omar, they won support by promising order after years of violence. In 1996, the Taliban captured Kabul and declared the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. the start of a harsh extremist regime. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union itself had collapsed in 1991. A few weeks after the September 11 attacks in 2001, the Americans invaded the country, hoping to weaken the Taliban. That did ultimately not succeed. The Taliban fought back for 20 years, and when the Americans withdrew in 2021, the fighters quickly retook their former positions. Since then, they have been the de facto rulers of Afghanistan. After returning to power, the Taliban set aside much of the existing legislation. They introduced new decrees, often communicated through tweets by Supreme Leader Hibatullah Akhundzada, believed to be about 58 years old. This frequently led to confusion, as judges, almost all Taliban-affiliated men, often without formal legal training, interpreted rulings in their own ways. To reduce this arbitrariness, the Taliban have now codified their criminal justice system. The 59-page legal code, written in Pashto, was adopted in January and recently published by the Afghan NGO Rawadari. The translated passages offer another look into the repressive system the Taliban have built. Dancing or even watching someone dance is forbidden. Insulting Taliban leaders is punishable by 20 lashes and 6 months in prison. Ridiculizing Islam carries a 2-year prison sentence. Spreading ideas considered contrary to Islam can, according to the text, be punished by death. The same applies to anyone labeled a Baghi or rebel. Because of severe poverty, Afghanistan is also struggling with modern slavery. Of the roughly 45 million inhabitants, an estimated 500,000 Afghans live in conditions of modern slavery, according to earlier calculations by the Australian NGO Walk Free. The legal code explicitly acknowledges and normalizes slavery. In multiple sections, it distinguishes between people who are free and those who are slaves. Certain corporal punishments may be carried out by a slave master. Although the Taliban urge all citizens to live pious lives, punishments are not equal for everyone. The population is divided into 4 categories under the law: religious scholars, ulama; the elite, ashraf; a middle class, and a lower class. For example, a scholar might receive only a reprimand for an offense, while someone from the lower class could face both imprisonment and corporal punishment for the same act. Notably, the code does set some limits on violence, though narrowly. Teachers are forbidden from using physical force against children if it results in broken bones, bruising, or torn skin. Husbands are also not allowed to beat their wives with a stick in a way that causes a wound or bodily injury. Violations can lead to 15 days in jail. Human rights organizations have reacted with strong concern. The UN Special Rapporteur on Afghanistan, Richard Bennett, has called the code extremely worrying. Critics also point to the vague wording of many provisions. According to experts, this creates a system in which the state can punish anyone at any time without explanation. The organization fears an increase in human rights abuses and a widespread suppression of fundamental civil liberties. The Taliban themselves have responded calmly to the criticism. People in society have different status, a spokesman told the Kabul Tribune. Some need a lighter punishment to be corrected, while others need a heavier punishment.